They wheeled my son past me on a gurney, and the last thing he said before the medicine pulled him under was, "Ma, you don't have to do this." I had already signed every paper they put in front of me. I had already made my peace with it 3 weeks before, sitting alone at my kitchen table with a stack of hospital brochures and a decision that was never really a decision at all. My name is Willetta Combs. I'm 63 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in March, I gave my son Jared my left kidney. He'd been sick for 2 years before that. Lupus had turned on him quiet and slow, the way it does, until his kidneys just gave up trying. Dialysis 3 times a week. A body that used to run track in high school, reduced to counting down minutes on a machine. When the doctors told me I was a match, I didn't call a family meeting. I didn't pray about it for weeks. I called the transplant coordinator back within the hour and asked what came next. What came next was paperwork, more than anybody tells you about. Consent forms, insurance authorizations, and one document in particular, a durable healthcare power of attorney. That named me the person who could speak for Jared if something went wrong on that table and he couldn't speak for himself. Nobody discussed who that should be. It was assumed. I was his mother. I was already in the pre-op waiting room hours before anyone else arrived. If you're watching this and you've ever sat in a hospital hallway waiting on news about your own child, I want you to drop where you're watching from in the comments right now, because I have a feeling a lot of you know exactly the kind of waiting I mean. The surgery went smooth. His numbers came back clean at the first follow-up, and everyone after that. I want to be honest with you. I wasn't looking for a medal. A mother doesn't sit and watch her child fade away and calculate what she's owed for stepping in. That was never in my mind. But somewhere around the 4th month, filling out yet another prior authorization form for his anti-rejection medication, sitting on hold with his insurance company for the 3rd time that week, I did catch myself wondering something small and quiet. Did anybody else even know what all this involved? Did Jared know I was still the one calling the pharmacy every month to make sure his prescription didn't lapse? Did his wife? Tavia is a sweet girl. Genuinely. She loves my son, and I believe she's glad he's alive same as I am. She just never asked what any of it looked like on my end. The calls, the forms, the follow-ups. And I never volunteered it, because that's not who I am. Bernice, her mother, had thrown together a little fundraiser online when we first found out how much the medication was going to cost long-term. $11,000 came in from people who barely know the difference between 1 kidney and 2. Bernice was proud of that, and I never once tried to take that pride away from her. 6 months after the surgery, Jared's doctor cleared him for full activity. That Friday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Tavia. A dinner invitation. A celebration of life, she called it, this Saturday. 25 of our closest family. At the villa on High Street. I remember smiling when I read it. I had no earthly idea what that dinner was actually going to cost me. The villa on High Street had white tablecloths and candles down the center of the table, and I sat near the middle, not the head, and told myself that didn't mean anything. Tavia had outdone herself. Flowers, a slideshow of Jared through the years propped on an easel by the door, a 3-tier cake with celebrating life written in gold icing. 25 of us crowded around that long table, cousins I hadn't seen since Easter, Jared's old football coach, Bernice holding court at the far end, in a dress the color of a stop sign. Jared stood up somewhere around the second course, tapping his fork against his water glass until the room quieted. He looked good, healthy, color back in his face that hadn't been there in 2 years. My chest went warm just looking at him. "I want to say something," he started, and I remember thinking, here it comes, and reaching for my own glass. He thanked God first, then his doctors, by name, every one of them. Then he turned toward the end of the table, toward Tavia, and his voice thickened up the way it does when he's about to cry. And to my wife. And my mother-in-law, Bernice, who organized the fundraiser and saved my life. 25 glasses lifted around that table. I lifted mine too, half a second behind everyone else, because my hand needed a moment to catch up to what my ears had just heard. Bernice pressed a hand to her chest like she'd been caught off guard by her own goodness. Tavia leaned into Jared's shoulder, glowing. Somebody's cousin near me said, "Ain't that beautiful?" Soft, to no one in particular. Not one face at that table turned toward me. I sat there with my glass still raised, waiting for the second half of the sentence that never came. Waiting for my name to follow theirs, even just tacked on at the end, even just an afterthought. It didn't come. The room moved on to clinking glasses and the low, happy murmur of people who didn't know they'd just watched something break. I set my glass down without drinking from it. Bernice caught my eye once, across the table, and smiled at me the way you smile at an aunt you're being polite to. Not unkind, just unaware, genuinely unaware, which somehow cut deeper than if she'd known. I stood up. Nobody noticed at first. The room was too loud, too warm, too pleased with itself. I smoothed the front of my dress, the same one I'd worn to Jared's dialysis appointments for 2 years, and I walked toward the door where the hostess had set out a little dish for everyone's car keys. Tavia's mother caught my arm gently as I passed. "Leaving already, Miss Willetta?" "Just tired," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. I found my keys in that little dish, my hand shaking just slightly as I sorted through the pile, and I didn't look back at the table before I stepped out into the parking lot. The night air hit my face and I let the tears come. Then, finally, where no one could see them fall. I sat in my car for a long moment before I turned the key, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than they needed to. 25 relatives back in that room, still celebrating a truth that wasn't true. My son's voice still echoing in my ears. My wife, my mother-in-law, saved my life, like the 11 hours I spent on an operating table had happened to somebody else's mother. By the time I pulled out onto High Street, my hands had gone still on the wheel, and something in me had gone still right along with them. I already knew, before I got anywhere near my own front door, exactly what I was going to do. I hadn't slept. By 6 that morning, I was already at my kitchen table with the binder open in front of me, the same binder I'd been keeping since the day of Jared's diagnosis, and I was going through it page by page like it was the first time I'd really looked at what was in it. Hospital consent forms, my signature on everyone, the ink faded on the oldest ones from 2 years of being folded and unfolded. The durable power of attorney with my name typed in the box, marked agent. Insurance appeals I'd written and refiled 3 separate times. And tucked in the back, a small spiral notebook nobody had ever seen. A running ledger, in my own handwriting, of every payment I'd made toward the medical loan beyond what the statement required. Numbers going back 6 months. The pen pressed hard enough into some pages that you could feel the indentation on the other side. My robe had slipped off one shoulder and I hadn't bothered fixing it. In the kitchen light, the thin white line of my surgical scar showed just above my collarbone, where the gown had shifted during recovery months back. A scar Jared had seen exactly once, the day they wheeled me out of that operating room, and never once asked about since. I wasn't crying anymore. I was just sorting. The knock came a little after 8. I knew it was Jared before I even opened the door. Some part of a mother always knows her child's knock, even after all these years. Ma. He stood on my porch in yesterday's clothes, hair not combed, like he'd left the house in a hurry. I wanted to come by, properly. Thank you for everything. For real. before the day gets away from us. Come in, I said, and stepped aside. He saw the binder before I could close it, and I watched his eyes catch on my exposed scar for half a second before they dropped to the papers. I hadn't meant for him to see either one that way. Spread open, uncovered. No softening between us anymore. What is all this? He picked up a page, the POA, his eyes moving down to find my name in the agent box. Ma, this is from the hospital. Why do you still have this out? Because it's still active, I said. Has been this whole time. Nobody ever changed it. He set the page down slower than he'd picked it up. Changed it to what? To you making your own decisions, or naming Tavia, somebody who isn't me. I kept my voice even, not sharp, just even. I'm the one the hospital calls if something goes wrong with your medication. I'm the one who's been calling the pharmacy every month. I'm the one who's been putting extra money on that loan you and Tavia took out, above what you owe, so it wouldn't fall behind. His face did something I hadn't seen it do in a long time, a kind of stillness, like a man realizing the floor under him isn't where he thought it was. His eyes went back to my shoulder, to the scar, and stayed there this time. I didn't know about the loan payments, he said quietly. Ma, I swear I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That's sort of the whole point. He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him try to find his way to an apology, mouth opening slightly and closing again, like the words wouldn't come in the right order yet. 25 glasses had gone up last night for people who wrote him a check. Not one had gone up for the woman standing in front of him with the proof of what she'd actually given him still visible on her own skin. I need to say something about last night. Not this morning, I said, gently but final. I already called the transplant office an hour ago. Told them to take my name off as your emergency contact and your healthcare agent, effective today. He blinked at me like I'd spoken a different language. You did what? Somebody needs to name a replacement, I said, pulling my robe closed over my shoulder at last, and closing the binder along with it. That was always supposed to be you and Tavia's job, not mine. Not anymore. My sister has never once let me finish a sentence when she already knows where it's headed. Odessa showed up at my door that same afternoon, still in her work scrubs, before I'd even called her. That's how she's always been. Some sixth sense between us that skips the phone call entirely. You look like something died, she said, stepping past me into the kitchen without waiting on an invitation. Nothing died. Then why do you look like it did? She pulled out a chair and sat, the way she does when she's not planning on leaving anytime soon. Talk. So I told her. All of it. The toast. The way 25 glasses went up for Tavia and Bernice and not one turned toward me. The drive home with my hands gone still on the wheel. Jared showing up that morning finding the binder spread open on my table. I told it plain. The way I'd tell anybody the weather, because if I let my voice do anything else, I was afraid of where it might go. Odessa didn't interrupt once. She let me get all the way to the end, to me calling the transplant office that morning, before she said a single word. So, let me understand you correctly. She leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. Your son stood up in front of 25 people and thanked a woman who forwarded a GoFundMe link and didn't mention the woman who gave him an organ out of her own body. He didn't mean anything by it, I said. He wasn't trying to hurt me. I didn't ask if he meant to. Her voice stayed even, but there was an edge under it now, the kind only a sister can get away with. I asked you to say out loud what actually happened. I looked down at my hands. What actually happened is I wasn't in the sentence. There it is. She reached over and put her hand flat on the table, not on top of mine, just near it, the way she's always shown comfort, close, not smothering. You don't owe them your body twice, Willetta. You already gave the first time. Nobody gets to keep taking quietly forever just because you're too dignified to say something. I'm not trying to be dignified. I'm trying to not turn into a bitter old woman over a toast. This isn't about a toast. Odessa shook her head slowly. A toast is words. What you're describing is 6 months of you carrying that whole family on your back in the dark, and not one of them even knowing the weight existed. That's not hurt feelings. That's erasure. The words sat heavy in the kitchen between us. I didn't argue with it because some small, tired part of me had been waiting for somebody else to say it first. You already called and took your name off things, Odessa said, watching my face carefully now. That wasn't nothing, Willetta. That was a decision. It was overdue. Maybe. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way she used to when we were girls, and she could tell I was hiding something. But let me ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer me. I waited. When Jared stood in your kitchen this morning, looking at that binder, did he understand what he was actually looking at? Or did he just see it? Gerald Whitfield has known me since before Jared was born, back when he was just a young lawyer doing wills for people in our church for next to nothing. He's got gray in his beard now, same as I do in my hair, and an office on Livingston Avenue that still smells like the same peppermint candy he's kept in a dish on his desk for 30 years. Willetta Combs. He stood when I came in, which he always does, an old-fashioned habit I've never told him I appreciate. Been a while. Not by accident, I said, sitting across from him. I need you to look at something. I laid the binder open on his desk. The same one Jared had seen 2 days before, though I didn't tell Gerald that part yet. I pointed to the healthcare power of attorney first. I want to know what it takes to come off this. Properly. Legally. Not just deciding in my own head. Gerald put on his reading glasses and looked it over slow, the way he does everything. This is still active, he said. Nobody's revoked it. Nobody's replaced it. You're still listed as Jared's agent. I know. I want that changed. Can I ask why? Or is it not my business? It's your business if you're going to help me do it right. I folded my hands in my lap. My son stood up in front of 25 people 2 nights ago and thanked everybody in his life for saving him, except the one who actually did it. I've been the one calling his pharmacy, following up on his labs, keeping this whole thing running quiet in the background for 6 months. Nobody asked me to stop. Nobody thanked me to keep going either. I'd like to just not be the one holding it anymore. Gerald was quiet a moment, turning a pen over in his fingers. I want to make sure you understand something before we do anything, Willetta. Not because I think you're wrong. Because I want it clean. Go ahead. The moment Jared became a competent adult again, recovered in his right mind, able to make his own decisions, the responsibility to name his own healthcare agent, to update his own emergency contact, that was never yours to carry. It was always his and Tavia's. You stepping back from this doesn't take anything away from him that he couldn't have handled himself any day these past 6 months, in about 20 minutes at his kitchen table. I let that settle over me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. So I stopped, searching for the word. I'm not doing anything to him. No, Gerald said plainly. You're doing something for yourself, which is different, and it's allowed. There's no law says a mother has to keep being the invisible one holding the paperwork together forever. You can walk away from a role nobody else ever stepped up to fill. And that's not sabotage, Willetta. That's just you stopping. I nodded slowly, feeling something in my chest loosen for the first time since that dinner. Draw it up, I said. The revocation. Today, if you can. Gerald was already reaching for a fresh legal pad. I can have it ready within the hour. He looked up at me over his glasses, something careful in his expression. You understand, this might look intentional to some people, even though it isn't malicious. Let it look like whatever it looks like, I said. I've done nothing wrong here, have I? No, Gerald said simply, setting down his pen. You haven't. Not one thing. I sat down that Sunday evening to do what I probably should have done months ago. Go through every statement, every payment, every dollar that had moved through that medical loan since the day we took it out. I'm not a woman who likes surprises in her own finances. My late husband taught me that, God rest him, back when we were young and broke, and learning the hard way what happens when you don't track every cent. So I pulled out the folder I kept the loan paperwork in, and I pulled up my bank app on the little tablet Jared had given me 2 Christmases ago, and I laid it all out on the table side by side. The loan had been for $38,000. That part I remembered clear, because I'd been the one sitting in the financing office at the transplant center when Jared and Tavia signed for it, and I'd co-signed right alongside them without a second thought. Bernice's GoFundMe had raised $11,000. That part I remembered too, because she'd posted the final total on Facebook with 3 exclamation points and a photo of Jared in his hospital bed, giving a thumbs up. $11,000 should have taken a real bite out of that 38. It should have shown up somewhere, some lump payment hitting the loan balance not long after the fundraiser closed, back around the time Jared was still in recovery and the bills were coming in heaviest. It didn't. I went back through 6 months of loan statements twice, thinking I'd missed something. The only payments that ever hit that account were the minimum monthly amount, plus whatever extra I'd been quietly adding on top these last several months without telling anyone. Nowhere, not once, did $11,000 show up as a payment toward what Jared owed. I sat back in my chair and let that settle into me slow, the way cold water does when you step into it a little at a time instead of all at once. Since the fundraiser platform had sent me a courtesy email back when it closed out, Gerald had needed it for one of the insurance appeals. I still had it saved. I pulled it up on the tablet next to the loan statements. $11,000 and change raised, a small processing fee taken off the top, and a single payout showing where the balance had gone. Not to the transplant center's billing office, not to the loan servicer, but to a personal account listed under Bernice's own name, the organizer of record. I wasn't foolish enough to think Bernice pocketed it outright. That's not what this felt like. What it felt like was closer to what I'd started noticing about that whole family lately. Money moving in directions nobody explained, decisions made and never circled back on. Maybe some of it went toward the dinner, the flowers, the 3-tier cake, the little parting gifts I'd seen on each table setting that night, wrapped in gold ribbon. Maybe some of it just got absorbed into things Bernice called part of the celebration, without ever asking whether that's what the money had actually been raised for. But sitting there, looking at her name on that payout line instead of the loan account where it belonged, I understood for the first time that whatever had happened to that money, it had passed through her hands first and stayed there long enough to become something else entirely. $11,000 people gave, believing it would save my son's life, and not $1 of it ever touched the debt that was actually keeping him alive. I thought about calling Tavia right then. I thought about calling Bernice directly, asking her plainly where the money went, forcing the kind of conversation that gets ugly fast at a family gathering. My hand actually hovered over my phone for a moment, thumb resting near Tavia's name in my contacts. But I put the phone back down. Not because I was scared of the conversation, because I wasn't ready yet to hand this over to anybody else's timing. I'd spent 6 months letting this family's math be somebody else's problem to explain, This time, I decided I'd hold on to what I knew a little while longer and let it wait until I understood exactly what I was going to do with it. I wasn't in the room for this part. Tavia told me herself much later, after everything had already come apart and there wasn't much reason left to keep it from me. But I've turned it over in my mind so many times since. I can see it near as clear as if I'd been standing in her kitchen myself. She was going through the mail at the counter, she said, sorting bills into the pile Jared handled and the pile she handled, same as they'd always done. The loan statement was in her stack that month, plain envelope, nothing unusual about it until she actually opened it and looked at the number printed at the top. The balance was higher than she remembered it being. Not by a little. She sat with it a minute, she told me, running the math in her head the way you do when a number doesn't match what you thought you knew. $11,000 had been raised for Jared. She'd seen the final GoFundMe total herself, seen her own mother post it online with those 3 exclamation points. In her mind, that money had gone where money like that is supposed to go, straight at the debt hanging over her husband's recovery. She didn't just sit with the feeling this time, she told me. She pulled out her own laptop right there at the counter and found the old GoFundMe page still live, screenshot the final total with the date it closed. Then she logged into the loan servicer's site herself, something she said she'd never once bothered to do in 6 months. Always trusting Jared, or his mother, had it handled. She pulled up every statement going back to the surgery and lined the dates up next to the fundraiser's closing date, looking for any payment that matched, even loosely, what should have landed. There wasn't one. She called Bernice that same afternoon, she said, more out of confusion than suspicion, just trying to understand. Mama, I'm looking at Jared's loan statement and the number's not what I thought it'd be. Didn't the fundraiser money go toward this? Bernice's answer came quick, Tavia said. Too quick, looking back. Some of it did, baby. There were expenses. You know, putting together everything for that dinner wasn't free, and people worked hard on that celebration for your husband. Which expenses? Mama, I've got the loan statements right here going back to before the fundraiser even ended. I don't see one payment that matches. Tavia, don't start counting pennies over a night. Your husband almost died and lived. That money went where it needed to go. Tavia said she let it drop right there because Bernice's voice had that particular edge to it, the one that meant the conversation was already over whether Tavia agreed or not. She saved the screenshots anyway, she told me, tucked into a folder on her laptop she didn't examine too closely that night, not ready yet to know what she might be building a case toward. But she said the number stayed with her the rest of that day, sat in the back of her mind while she made dinner, while she watched Jared laugh at something on the television like a man who didn't have a single worry left in the world. She thought about calling me. She told me later that thought crossed her mind more than once that week, that maybe I would know something she didn't, since I'd been the one closest to all of it from the very beginning, the forms and the follow-ups, and everything nobody else had ever bothered to track. She didn't know yet what I already knew sitting in my own kitchen with my own bank statements spread out in front of me. She just knew, she said, that something about that number didn't sit right, and that maybe it was time to ask somebody who wasn't her mother. The bank had one of those automated kiosks now, but I still went to the counter and waited for a person, because some things I don't trust to a machine, and money is one of them. The young man behind the counter, Marcus, his name tag said, pulled up the account and turned the screen toward me the way they do, more out of courtesy than necessity. Everything looks good, Mrs. Combs. You've had an automatic transfer set up for the past 6 months. Extra $200 on top of the minimum due each cycle, going toward this medical loan. He glanced up. You want to keep that running, or is there something you'd like to change today? I looked at the screen a moment. 6 months of extra payments, one line after another. All of it quiet. All of it mine. I want to cancel the automatic extra, I said. Just leave it at the minimum from here on. He typed for a moment. You want me to cancel it effective this cycle or after the next one processes? This cycle, I said. Today, if it can be done today. No problem. He clicked a few more things, then looked up again, the way people do when they think they might be missing something. Just so you understand. This'll bring the monthly payment down some, but it'll also mean the balance comes down slower than it has been. You're sure that's what you want? I thought about Jared's face in my kitchen, looking at that binder like he was seeing me for the first time in years. I thought about the toast. 25 glasses lifted toward 2 women who never signed a single form. I'm sure, I said. It was never my loan to begin with. I was just helping it along. Marcus nodded. The way people do when they've heard an answer that isn't really meant for them, and finish the change without asking anything further. I want to be clear about something, because I've turned this over enough times in my own head to know exactly what it was and what it wasn't. I wasn't punishing my son. I wasn't trying to make his life harder or teach him some kind of lesson through his own bank statement. Jared is a grown man. He and Tavia signed for that loan themselves, sat right there at that same financing office table I did, and put their own names on it, same as mine. Whatever they owed each month, they were always capable of paying on their own. I hadn't been keeping them afloat. I'd simply been quietly making the water calmer than it needed to be, without either of them ever knowing there'd been a current at all. All I did that afternoon was stop swimming out ahead of them. I walked out of that bank with my receipt folded into my purse and no particular feeling of triumph, just a kind of settling, the way a house does after a long winter. Small creaks and shifts. Nothing dramatic. Just weight, finding its true resting place again. It was 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday, when the mail carrier delivered a loan statement to a different address for the first time in 6 months, not mine, but Jared and Tavia's. Showing a minimum payment neither one of them had thought to look closely at in a very long while. My phone buzzed on a Wednesday evening while I was rinsing dishes, and I almost didn't look at it right away. The way you don't rush for things anymore once you've learned not to expect much. It was Jared. Ma, you free Sunday? Just us. I want to take you to lunch. Nowhere fancy, just want to talk. Really talk. Not like before. I set the dish towel down and read it twice. Really talk, not like before. 4 words doing a lot of work. I sat with my phone in my hand a long moment, feeling something cautious and unfamiliar stir in my chest. Not quite hope, because hope has burned me plenty in my life, but something standing close enough to it that I didn't trust myself to name it just yet. I typed back, Sunday works. Where were you thinking? That diner off Parsons you used to take me to after church when I was a kid. Still there. I remembered that diner well. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that hadn't worked since before Jared could walk. A waitress named Pearl who used to slip him extra pancakes when I wasn't looking. He hadn't mentioned that place in years. The fact that he remembered it now, reached for it now, meant something to me I wasn't ready to say out loud even to myself. Sunday came clear and a little cool. The kind of morning that makes you want to sit somewhere with good coffee and take your time. I got there before him, out of habit more than anything, and slid into a booth near the back. Jared came in a few minutes later, and something in the way he walked toward me was different than it had been in weeks. Less careful, less like a man choosing every word before he let it out of his mouth. Thanks for coming, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. You said you wanted to talk? I do. He turned his coffee cup slowly on the table without drinking from it, the way his father used to when he was working up to something. Ma, I've been thinking a lot since that morning at your kitchen table. About the toast. About everything you said. I know I hurt you. And I don't think I even understood how bad until I really sat with it. I didn't say anything yet. I wanted to hear where he was going before I met him halfway. I want to make it right, he said. Not just apologize and move on like it didn't happen. I want to actually understand everything. The loan, the POA, all of it. I want you to walk me through it. Really slow. So I know exactly what you've been carrying this whole time. That's a start, I said. Have you looked into naming somebody new yet? Yourself? Or Tavia? He paused, and something in his face admitted the answer before his mouth did. Not yet. I keep meaning to. Things got busy, and honestly, some part of me didn't want to make it feel official yet. Like that would mean this was really over between us instead of something we were still working through. It's a form, Jared. Not a verdict. I know, he said quietly. I'll get it done. I promise you that. Something in my chest loosened, just slightly, like a knot given an inch of room. It hadn't had in weeks. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. We talked for almost 2 hours that morning, easier than we had and longer than I wanted to admit. For the first time since that dinner, I let myself believe something might actually be mending. I wasn't there to hear it. But Tavia told me much later that she'd mentioned the lunch to her mother that same evening in passing. The way you mention anything that doesn't seem like it needs weighing first. Jared took his mama to lunch today, she said. Just the two of them. Said they really talked. Bernice, Tavia told me, went quiet on the other end of the phone for a moment before she answered. I didn't hear any of this conversation myself. Jared told me pieces of it weeks later, when there wasn't much left to protect by keeping quiet, and Tavia filled in the rest. But I've sat with it long enough now that I can walk through it like I was standing in the doorway myself. Bernice called Jared the Tuesday after that Sunday lunch, 2 days after Tavia had mentioned it to her in passing. Jared said she opened with something soft, something that sounded like concern before it turned into something else entirely. I heard you took your mother to lunch, she said. That's sweet, baby. How'd she seem to you? Good, Jared told her. Better than I expected, honestly. We talked a long time. I think I finally understand what she's been dealing with. All this time, nobody else was paying attention to. There was a pause on the line, Jared said, just long enough to notice. That's good, baby. I'm glad. A small laugh, warm on the surface. You know, it's funny. My own mother went quiet like that once, years ago, after my daddy passed. Wouldn't say a word about what was really bothering her for the longest time. Then one day, she just came around on her own, once she'd had her time to sit with it. Some women are built that way. Willetta strikes me as one of them. Maybe, Jared said, but I don't want her sitting with it alone anymore. That's kind of the point. Oh, I know. I just remember how my mother used to get when people pushed too hard, too soon, before she was ready. Made her retreat further, if anything. Course, every woman's different. A pause, light as anything. You're a good son for wanting to fix it fast, though. That says a lot about you. Jared told me later that something about the way she said it made sense to him in the moment, twisted just enough to sound like an offhand memory instead of what it actually was. Never a single instruction. Nothing he could point back to afterward and call advice. Just a story that left its own shape in his mind after she'd hung up. So you think I should wait? He asked her. And he told me he wasn't even sure why he'd asked it, only that the words had come out of him on their own. I think you should do whatever feels right to you, baby, Bernice said, I just know rushing never got anybody anywhere with a woman who needs her own time. Jared told me he sat with that phone call a long while after it ended, turning it over. And somewhere in that turning, he'd convinced himself that backing off was the kinder thing to do, the more respectful thing. He didn't call me that week to set up another visit. He didn't send another text asking to go deeper into the binder, the loan, any of it. He told himself he was giving me room to breathe. I didn't know any of this was happening on the other end of things. All I knew, sitting in my own kitchen that week, was that Sunday had felt like something real, something I'd let myself hope might keep going. I checked my phone more than I want to admit that week. Not out of impatience, just a quiet, hopeful kind of waiting, the kind you don't want to name out loud in case naming it makes the disappointment worse. The call I was waiting for never came. I only learned the details of this conversation afterward, pieced together from what Tavia told me herself. But by then, she'd stopped keeping the timeline from me at all. So I trust what she gave me here. This was about 5 weeks after that Sunday lunch, she told me later, long enough that the loan balance had already crept further than any of them realized. She said she went to her mother's house on a Thursday afternoon, planning to ask carefully, gently, the way she asks most things. She'd brought the actual loan statement with her this time, printed out, numbers circled in pen, along with the GoFundMe payout summary she'd requested from the platform's support line the week before. An itemized record showing the single lump transfer that had gone out once the fundraiser closed. Mama, I need you to walk me through this. All the way through, not just some of it went to expenses. I need actual numbers. She set both documents side by side on the counter. I even called the fundraising site directly. They sent me the payout record. It shows one transfer for the full amount, straight to you. Not to the venue, not to a florist, not to the loan. To you. Bernice was in her kitchen, Tavia said, wiping down a counter that didn't need wiping, the way people do when their hands need something to do besides sit still. Baby, why are you bringing this up again? I already told you. You told me some of it covered the dinner, flowers, the cake. I understand that much. But $11,000, Mama. Even a lavish dinner doesn't eat up $11,000, and I've got the venue's own invoice right here too. It's a third of what you raised. Tavia set the invoice down next to the other 2 papers. Where's the rest of it? Bernice picked up the payout record, studied it a beat too long for someone who supposedly already knew the answer. There were the parting gifts, she said finally. The little gold-wrapped ones on every table setting. Those weren't cheap, Tavia. I wanted it to feel special for Jared. That's maybe $1,000, Mama, not 10. I did the math against the venue invoice before I came here. Bernice set the paper down harder than she needed to. I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own kitchen. I'm not interrogating you. I have 3 documents on this counter that don't match your story, and I'm asking you to explain the difference. Tavia said her voice came out steadier than she expected it to, which surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise her mother. Bernice's story shifted then, Tavia said, right in front of her. First, it was the dinner costs. Then it became administrative fees from the fundraising platform, which Tavia pointed out directly weren't listed anywhere on the payout summary. Then it became something about needing to set some aside in case anything else came up, which nobody had ever asked her to do or agreed to. You're changing the answer every time I show you a new piece of paper, Tavia said quietly. Bernice didn't have a response to that. She just stood there at her counter, arms crossed now, jaw set, the way it gets when she knows she's cornered but isn't ready to admit it out loud. I did what I thought was right, Bernice finally said. I organized that whole thing myself. Nobody else stepped up to do it. Nobody asked you to spend it on things Jared never saw a dollar of, Tavia said. That's not the same as helping. She told me she left her mother's house that afternoon with her hands still shaking on the steering wheel. The 3 documents sitting on the passenger seat beside her. None of Bernice's answers matching a single one of them. And underneath all of it, she said, one thought kept surfacing louder than the rest. If her own mother could shift the truth that easily, standing right in front of documented proof, what exactly had been happening on Willetta's end of things this whole time, quiet and unquestioned, while everyone assumed somebody else was handling it? She said she knew, driving home that evening, that she couldn't keep wondering from a distance anymore. She was going to have to sit down with Willetta herself and hear the rest of it directly, whatever it turned out to be. Tavia came to see me the following Monday, and I knew before she said a word that whatever she'd come to tell me had been sitting heavy on her a while. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Jared had found the binder, though I didn't say that out loud, and she told me everything. The statement she'd found in the mail, the phone call with her mother that hadn't sat right, the Thursday afternoon confrontation, the shifting answers, the documents that never matched, the $11,000 that never landed where it was supposed to. I should have asked sooner, she said. I should have asked the day I saw that first number. You're asking now, I told her. That counts for something. I didn't tell her, that day, what I'd already found on my own months earlier, going through my own bank statements on a Sunday evening. Some things I've learned are better carried quietly a little longer than handed over all at once. She had enough sitting on her already. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was how the numbers had already started moving on their own, quiet and steady. In the weeks since I'd stopped adding my extra payment. I checked in with Gerald that same week, mostly out of habit now. The way you check a wound to see if it's healing the way it should. He'd pulled the loan's current standing at my request. Balance is climbing faster than it should, he said, sliding a printout across his desk. Minimum payments alone aren't quite covering the interest accruing each month. Another few cycles like this, it'll be in real trouble. That's their loan to manage now, I said, and I meant it the way Gerald himself had taught me to mean it. Not cruelty, just distance. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere across town that same week, Jared sat through a routine follow-up at the transplant center, the kind he'd had a dozen times before without a second thought. Tavia told me about it after, once there was no more reason to keep anything from me at all. The nurse drawing his blood mentioned, almost in passing, that his creatinine had ticked up slightly from his last visit. Nothing alarming yet, she said. Just something to watch. She made a note to flag it for the coordinator to review before his next appointment. A few days later, when that same coordinator sat down to review the flag, she pulled up Jared's file to check his contact information before scheduling the follow-up. The emergency contact field was empty, not outdated, not an old number that no longer worked, simply blank, the way a form looks when nobody has ever filled it back in since it was cleared. She checked the healthcare agent field next. Same result. Whoever had once held that role had been formally removed months earlier, clean and complete, exactly as requested, and no one had ever come back to name someone new. She made a note in his chart, a reminder to request updated contact information when he came in for his next appointment, and moved on to the rest of her list. Nothing urgent yet. Just a gap somebody would need to close before it became one. Tavia only learned about that note weeks later, buried in Jared's records, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. And by the time either of them noticed it at all, they'd already have far bigger things sitting in front of them. I wasn't there for any of this. And I thank God I wasn't. Because Tavia has only ever told me pieces of that day. And even in pieces, it's hard enough to hold. It started small, she said. A Wednesday evening, 2 days after that blood draw, the nurse had flagged as nothing alarming. Jared came in from work saying he felt off, tired in a heavy, sudden way that didn't feel like ordinary tired. His hands had a slight tremor to them he blamed on too much coffee. By dinner, he said his heart felt like it was skipping, little flutters he tried to laugh off. Tavia said she didn't like the look on his face by the time he sat down at the table. Pale in a way that wasn't right. Confused twice about something she'd just said to him seconds before. She didn't wait on the after-hours line. She called 911 outright, and within minutes there were paramedics in her living room, then an ambulance ride, then the bright, fast-moving chaos of an emergency room that didn't ask a single question about paperwork before they got him back into a bed and hooked to a monitor. His potassium levels had climbed high enough that the ER physician used the word critical out loud, plainly, the way doctors do when there's no more time to soften anything. Hyperkalemia, he called it. His rejecting kidney no longer filtering the way it needed to. His heart rhythm growing dangerously unstable because of it. They started him on emergency treatment within minutes of the diagnosis, the way any hospital has to for something that serious, license or paperwork, or none of it standing in the way of a heart that couldn't wait. What the doctors needed help with wasn't permission to treat him. It was information, his full medical history, his medication list. Who else should know he was here? And when the intake nurse asked Tavia who was listed as his emergency contact, and then went to confirm it in his file, she came back a moment later with a small frown. It's showing. Blank, ma'am. No contact listed. No healthcare agent on file. That's unusual for someone with his history. Do you know why that might be? Tavia said the question landed harder than it should have, standing there in a hallway with her husband on a monitor 12 feet away. She knew exactly why. She just didn't know how to say it out loud to a stranger in scrubs. It's complicated, she managed. His mother was listed. It got changed a few months back. The nurse nodded, unbothered. The way people are when something is confusing but not currently their problem to solve. We'll just need you to fill out a new one before discharge then, and make sure somebody's listed going forward. Jared slipped in and out of clear thought for a stretch that felt, Tavia said, like hours instead of minutes. Though the doctors kept telling her he was responding to treatment, that his numbers were already starting to turn. She stood in that hallway with her phone in her hand, scrolling to my name, thumb hovering over it the way mine had hovered over hers, back when I first found out about the $11,000. She didn't call. She told me later she didn't know if she had any right to ask me for anything. Not after everything. Not after what her own mother had done. Not after months of me carrying weight nobody bothered to notice. The treatment worked the way it needed to. By early morning, his heart rhythm had steadied, his numbers coming back down slow but sure. Nobody's form, filled out or blank, had changed a single thing about how fast the doctors moved once they understood what they were looking at. But somewhere in that long night, sitting alone in a hallway with a blank form in her hand and no one to call but herself, Tavia understood something else entirely. That whatever else this gap had or hadn't cost them, it had cost her the one person she most needed standing beside her. And she had no one to blame for that but the family that had let it happen. Jared stabilized that night once the emergency treatment finally started working the way it needed to. Tavia told me his color came back slow over the following hours. And by morning, the doctors were using words like out of immediate danger instead of critical. He stayed 3 more days for observation. Tavia barely left his side, she said. Except for the one afternoon she went home to shower and found the second letter waiting in the mail pile she hadn't touched in days. Not a statement this time. A notice. The loan had gone 30 days past due. She sat on their kitchen floor with that notice in her hand, she told me, because her legs didn't feel steady enough to stand while she read it. $38,000. A balance that had crept upward for months while she and Jared assumed, without ever checking closely, that the minimum was covering what it needed to cover. She brought it to the hospital the next morning. Jared was sitting up in bed, stronger than he'd been, color mostly returned, and she set the notice on his blanket without a word first. "What is this?" he said, though she told me his voice already knew before she answered. "It's the loan. It's behind." She sat down slowly on the edge of his bed. "Jared, I need to tell you everything. All of it. I should have told you weeks ago." She told him about the statement she'd found months back, the one that didn't match what she expected, about calling her mother, about the vague answers, about going back a second time with the numbers circled, and the documents this time, watching Bernice's story shift 3 separate ways, in the same conversation, even with proof sitting right in front of her. About the $11,000 that never once touched what he owed. Jared didn't say anything for a long stretch, Tavia said. Just sat there with the notice in his lap, staring at a number that had apparently been growing for months right under everyone's nose. "How long has it been due?" he finally asked. 30 days. But Jared... She stopped, made herself keep going. "It was staying current before that. Somebody was covering the difference every month above the minimum for almost half a year. I only just found out it stopped a few weeks back." "Who?" Tavia said she didn't have to answer him. She watched it land on his face before she said a single word. The binder on his mother's kitchen table. The toast. The morning he'd found her sorting through 6 months of quiet paperwork nobody had ever asked her to keep. "She's been paying it," he said quietly. "This whole time, even after everything." "She stopped a few weeks ago," Tavia said gently. Jared was quiet for a moment, and then something else seemed to surface behind his eyes. Something Tavia said looked less like shock and more like shame. "The nurse asked me about my emergency contact," he said slowly. "In the hospital. Said it was blank. Asked if I knew why. I told her I'd handle it after I got out." He looked down at his hands. "Tavia, I told Ma at that diner I'd get it done. I promised her. That was weeks ago. I never even opened the form." Tavia didn't say anything to that, she told me. There wasn't really anything to say. "It didn't cost me anything, medically," he said, almost to himself. "They told me that. Doctors didn't need a name on a form to save my life, but it should have had her name on it anyway. Not because it mattered that night, because I told her it would, and then I just didn't." He sat with that a long while, Tavia said, staring at nothing in particular, the weight of it settling somewhere she couldn't reach for him. Not the fear of what almost happened, but the plainer, harder truth of what he'd simply failed to do. 2 days after he was discharged, before he'd even fully caught his breath from everything that had happened, Jared got in his car and drove straight to my house. I was at my kitchen table when I heard the car pull into the driveway, and I knew it was him before I looked out the window, the same way I'd known his knock that morning months ago. He looked different walking up my porch steps this time, thinner than he should have been after everything his body had been through, but steadier somehow, like a man who'd finally stopped outrunning something. "Ma." He stood at my door, not stepping in until I moved aside for him. "Can I come in?" "You know you can." He sat across from me at the same table where he'd once found my binder spread open, where I'd once told him I'd already called the transplant office. He didn't reach for anything to hold this time, no coffee cup to turn between his hands. He just looked at me, plain and direct, in a way I hadn't seen from him in a long while. "I know everything now," he said. "Tavia told me all of it. The fundraiser, what Bernice did with the money, the loan, and how long you'd been covering the difference nobody asked you to cover, the POA, and what it actually meant that you were the one holding it this whole time. He paused. And I know what I said at that dinner. I've replayed it more times than I can count. I didn't say anything yet. I wanted him to get all the way to the bottom of it on his own. I stood up in front of everybody who loves us both, he said. And I thanked 2 people for saving my life while the person who actually gave me an organ out of her own body sat right there and watched me do it. I didn't even notice I'd done it until you walked out. That's the part that sits the worst with me, Ma. Not that I made a mistake, that I didn't even see it happening. No, I said quietly. You didn't. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't hurt you, he said. I'm not asking you to go back to doing what you were doing before either, carrying all of it quiet, so nobody had to think about it. I don't want that anymore. I want to know what you're actually carrying from now on, so I can carry some of it too. I studied my son's face a long moment, looking for the thing I needed to see before I let myself answer him the way I wanted to. I forgive you, I said finally. I want you to hear me say that plainly, because I mean it. But forgiving you doesn't mean going back to being the quiet one in this family, the one everybody assumes is fine because she never says otherwise. I gave you a kidney because you're my son, and I'd do it again tomorrow without blinking. I'm not giving up being seen too, not anymore. You shouldn't have to choose between those things, he said. No, I agreed. I shouldn't have. But I did once, and I'm not going back. Tavia and I talk more now than we ever did before all this. Real conversations, not the polite kind. Bernice and I exchange pleasantries at family gatherings, same as always, though I notice she's never once said the word sorry outright. Only things that sound close to it if you don't listen too carefully. I've made my peace with that. Not everybody finds their way to owning what they've done, and I've stopped waiting on the ones who won't. I love my son. I'm grateful every single day that he's alive to stand in my kitchen and finally see me. But I am done being the part of the story nobody thought to mention.